Hello, team players. Welcome. This is the start of the Los Angeles Chargers week. The Chargers are one of these teams that obviously they made the playoffs. They had a lot of good things happening. The offense, when they could block, was basically unrivaled, except for when they played the Chiefs. But that's a side story within itself. Overall, the Chargers did a lot of good things that you can build upon. But the shadow that creeps over this team was there's a lot of games that they played that they end up losing to that they were the more talented roster. And when we look at this team up and down, the 2022 version, they had three receivers that were amazing. In terms of you rank my number one versus everyone's number one, my number two versus number twos, and three against threes, they will be in the top five in all of those categories. They have a top five number one receiver, top five number two, and a top five number three. Their tight end is underutilized because, quite frankly, there's too many people to give the ball to. They have 100% a top three running back in the backfield, and their quarterback, when he is on, is the best in the league. And that includes the other guy who's in this division. So San Diego, when you look at it like that, you're like, how don't we go 17-0? Well, reality is that's not really possible. And when we look at this, the offensive line for a lot of the season, especially after people start getting hurt, was the crimping point. It doesn't matter how talented your receivers are. If Herbert doesn't have time, things aren't going to work. So this is an incredibly talented team, Bob, someone that I really love watching. But unfortunately, they just fall apart on defense in a way that they really shouldn't. So, Bob, I want to hear your view of the 2022 Chargers and what you saw go down with them.
To be honest with you, Joe, I'm not a big fan of the Los Angeles Chargers at all. I really felt like this year they beat up on bad teams and they lost to good teams. And sometimes they lost to teams that weren't really that good, like the Denver Broncos that last game of the season. And
or the Raiders.
And you look at this team. This is a team that has consistently, over the years, been marred by injuries. I don't know what it is about this team. It seems to me like they're the New York Giants of the West,
where they are.
You have a lot of talent at times, but that talent never sees the field. And I can't say for certain how many offensive linemen they played. It was definitely less than the last couple of years, but when push came to shove, they couldn't shove. And, that's one of those things where when you speak about the Los Angeles Chargers, and one of the things that come to mind is Justin Herbert, and one of the things that comes to mind is Austin Eckler. Nowhere in that frame of reference do we think Los Angeles Chargers defense. And that's for a very good reason, because the defense is not good. It might be good.
They have two all-pros on it.
And this is the issue. It might be good at stopping the run, and they could at times maybe do that. It might be good at stopping the pass occasionally, but it's not. It really isn't. If you look at the stats for the Chargers, just by a defensive standpoint here, they let up they were the worst team letting up per rush, 5.4 yards per carry. They were the 27th team out of 32 in terms of yardage allowed per game on the ground at 144. Their defense was also garbage, like just straight garbage. And but it was slightly better. And this is what we've seen from stats, and this is what we see from game footage, is that if you have a vulnerability, you are going to expose that vulnerability over and over and over again until it doesn't work. And the Chargers on defense for the rush, you could just do whatever you wanted, essentially, as the season went forward. And then maybe you didn't pass as much, so the team looked a little bit better at times. But what you really saw, the team that the Chargers really is, at least this year, was what you saw in that playoff game. What you saw in that playoff game was the Chargers in a nutshell. A team that is incredibly, incredibly explosive. A team that over the time, if they're possessing the ball, they can move the ball, but they can't move it as well as you want them to move it, because Austin Eckler, as good as he is and as good as we want him to be and as good as he thinks he is, there are games where he doesn't rush for more than 30 yards.
Mm-hmm.
There are games where maybe he'll catch for 30 yards, and he's a fantasy football monster, but that's because he catches a lot of catches. He might go 7 for 60 and then 8 for 40, and you're sitting there going, well, I'm not paying this guy that much money to do that. And you got to ask yourself here, is this a sustainable model with a talent like Justin Herbert? And whereas you see these things as positive, Joe, and you see them as a fun team to watch, I see them as a team that they barely beat the Browns. They're barely beating the Houston Texans. They're barely beating the Falcons. And if you look at these teams, barely, the only team they really shellacked, I think, was the Colts. And so
Chiefs didn't do that.
You had a chance to be phenomenal, and you're in a division now where, as much as people hate Russell Wilson, he's still there.
Mm-hmm.
You have Patrick Mahomes in your division, and whoever you have right now in Los Angeles, but you're in the AFC where it's a quarterback-driven conference, and so you've got to keep him on the upright. You've got to give him weapons that are healthy. You've got to keep him, in positions to win games. And if your defense is giving you a lead and then you're not capitalized on it, or if your defense is losing that lead that you gave them, this is not a sustainable thing for the Chargers. And the way they got beat by Jacksonville in that playoff game, that should never have happened. We had our guest from Jacksonville come on, and he explained that was a great matchup for the Jaguars,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the way that the Chargers played, and you saw it, and you're like, I couldn't believe that the Chargers got up to that big of a lead, but then I could believe that they gave it up.
Well, to break that game down, I mean, at the end of the day, everything that could have gone wrong for Jacksonville happened, like we look at the beginning of the game, we got a turnover first play of the game. Then we have on a fourth down play, a blatant penalty that's not called, results in another interception.
Mm-hmm.
Now, credit to San Diego's or the Chargers offense every single time, because they capitalize on it. They finished drives and put up 27
That's
points
what
in
I'm
the first
saying.
half, but they also were getting flukes. Not too often your gunner on punt coverage is going to get a punt that lands on his head and then you get the ball on the 6-yard line.
Exactly.
So they do a lot of good things of capitalizing, but it fell, and this is why I'm worried about.
And a lot of that
game.
falls on Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert is so phenomenally talented and good at his position that it is almost criminal to have a guy like Patrick Mahomes just like be living in the same timeline as him, because if Patrick Mahomes did not exist in the Justin Herbert timeline, we would be talking about Justin Herbert.
Well, that's the same thing, but that's the Charger way. I mean, if Rivers didn't exist during Peyton and Brady, the exact same thing was true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. There were
this
three
has been
quarterbacks.
The Chargers forever.
Three quarterbacks in the AFC for 30 years made the Super Bowl, and Rivers wasn't one of them. And Rivers might be a Hall of Famer.
And neither was Breeze.
Yeah. Well, Breeze was in the NFC, so at least he had a chance. But it was only Peyton, Brady, and Ben. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it, that's crazy how stacked the AFC was. But this is my fear with that loss to Jacksonville that the Chargers had, was that's the kind of thing that can derail a franchise. Like I had that on par with when Atlanta blew the lead to New England.
Yeah, they haven't come back yet.
They have not come back yet. And with the Chargers, is that because when you watch the second half of that game, which I just did moments ago, they could not create any momentum. It was almost like when they went into halftime, they had a kegger and then they just partied their asses off, and they had no idea how to recover.
This is
And
the issue.
Lawrence came out wanting to punch them,
The
and
issue
they just weren't
is
able to handle it.
Eckler. Eckler is the issue with how this franchise is going to go for the next couple of years.
How come?
If they decide to sign him, right? If you decide to sign Eckler, you know exactly what you're getting. You're getting a player that can play receiver. You're getting a player that can drop balls. You're getting a player who is decent enough on the ground and and has had games where he's racked up 163 yards, 173 yards on the ground. So he's talented. He could do it. But with the way that team is built, you need someone who's a closer too. And right now, I don't. And correct me if I'm incorrect on your on your feelings here, but I don't feel like they've had that type of running back that can really close it out for you, that you would want to have the ball in your hands since LaDainian Tomlinson.
You're 100% correct. Eckler is a one-of-a-kind talent. He's phenomenal at what he does, but he's not a between the tackles pounded out. He's not Henry. He's not even close to that. And I've gone through the thought experiment of what if Josh Jacobs was on this team instead of Eckler? Like, obviously, the call for Eckler is he scores all the touchdowns, all the points in the world.
Yeah.
But
and I'm not saying he's not great.
They don't really need that talent. I mean, so can Williams and so can Keenan Allen. They're both phenomenal. And like I said, Everett is an above average tight end that just doesn't get utilized enough because of injury, but also there's just not enough ball to go around. And if this is the best team to play Madden with, in my opinion, because you can score a billion points and then not care about defense. And they have one player on defense, you just try to sack with them. I mean, this is why I think they're a great watch. They don't blow anyone out because they can't put games away. Like we look at other teams in the NFL. If New England went into halftime with a 27-point lead, there's no way in hell that they're losing that game. They're going to give the ball to Stevenson, and then it's going to be over. Same with half of the teams in the league. Like, imagine Tennessee with a 14-point lead at halftime. There's no point in watching the second half. You just know what's going to happen. But
that's because their defense is. That's because Tennessee's defense is actually pretty.
Well, that's the part of it. They don't have a power running game, and their defense can't get off the field. So I want to jump back earlier in the year. I believe it was week 13 when they were playing the Raiders in Vegas.
Let me look it up.
And again, they had a lead. They could not get off the field. In fact, 3 times on Carr's massive drive where he brought them back, defensive holding on third down extended the game.
Yeah.
And also in that game, they were only in the Carr was only in the red zone once. They were letting up deep plays like crazy. I believe Adams had a 54-yard touchdown in that one. Like, when the Chargers when you analyze this team and you would put it on scales of offensive talent and defensive talent, they might be the most unbalanced team in the entire NFL because they have such a stacked offense and they have 2.5 good players on defense and nothing else. And the one thing with the defense is you're as good as your weakest link. And there's a lot of weak links on that defense.
And it's bad too.
Yeah. So, but I don't want to end this with completely hate on the.
But I do want to mention this, Joe. In the game that you mentioned, as you were watching it, you could obviously see that the running game wasn't working. The stats in that game: 72 rushing yards. I'm going to read you the rushing stats in all of these games, both wins and losses.
This is the playoff game or the whole season?
First game of the season to the last game of the season.
Okay.
And this could be an accumulation of multiple running backs, mind you, too.
Gotcha.
79 or 76, 75, 26, 81, 238, 73, 53, 91, 51, 115, 65, 72, 82, 74, 101, 192, 59, 67. So
one of those didn't look like the others.
So you look at this. Against the Rams, they went off for 192 yards. Herbert
Oh, the
only
Rams
passed
couldn't stop
for
anyone after
239
Donald was
yards.
out.
They couldn't stop anything in that game. The game that was 101, they played the Colts. The game that they played the Chiefs was 115. They went off on the Chiefs for that one. And then the other game was the Browns. And we all know the Browns defense early in the season and mostly throughout the season could not stop the run. Now, the game they played against Jacksonville early in the season, they got basically shellacked. 38-10. And they knew what Jacksonville was then. And then they come around and play them again in the playoffs, and they lose 31-30. But each of those times, cumulatively against Jacksonville's defense, complete, utter, just abandonment of the run. 26 yards, 67 yards. And
the part of it that doesn't make sense to me is that there obviously is a great attraction to throwing the ball to all of these great weapons, and Ekler counting as one of them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great attraction to that. But when you know your defense isn't that great, don't put it on the field. And though it's the most basic thing of the sport.
Yeah.
If you hold the ball, your defense by definition is not on the field. And you hold the ball in this game by running it.
Well,
that's why I look at this team and say, it might be a little unfair to judge this defense because they're constantly out there, although they're normally out there with a lead. And when you're out there with a lead, you should be generating sacks like crazy, and they only have one pass rusher, and maybe Sebastian Day or Joseph Day steps up to become the second one because he can do great things.
Here's the most damning thing about the Chargers, Joe.
Ready.
The highest targeted player on that team, Ausin Ekler. He had 107 receptions. The next player on that team had 72 receptions, and that's Josh Palmer. Mike Williams and both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were hurt, but they each got 66 and 63. No Los Angeles Charger wide receiver, running back, or tight end got more than 900 yards. So you have a talent in Justin Herbert.
Part of that too, though, to be fair to the numbers here and kind of put a little illustration to it, is Herbert was running for his life a lot.
I get it. He was pressured a lot. He was pressured a lot. And that's why I'm saying is, if you're going to build a team in the way that they've built this team, like I said earlier, your number one priority heading into this part of the offseason is to get your line secured and decide, am I going to be a power running team and then go out and get the personnel to do that? Am I going to be this West Coast dump it down type of team? Get the personnel to do that. You already have half that personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Or am I going to be a deep passing team and fit the skill set of these deep threats that I have? Is that what I'm going to be? If so, I have to have the talent to start with and the depth. The number one thing about all football teams, and we all know this and we can say it all the time, is depth. If you have star players but you don't have depth, when those star players get hurt, you're cooked. Mm-hmm. And that's the Chargers in a nutshell. But you want to think positively, and the best positive thing you can say is they still have Justin Herbert. So they're never out of the game.
They have a winning team. They made the playoffs. It's not like this team was bad. That they made the playoffs. That they're incredibly talented when they're all out. I mean, that's the part that gets. You have an all-pro quarterback. You have an all-pro pass rusher. You have an all-pro safety, all-pro running back, and one of the, maybe he's aged out now, but one of the best receivers in football in Keenan Allen. Like, you look at that, and you're building a team. You got those spots taken care of. That should be a Super Bowl contending team, not a team that blows a 27-point lead in a playoff game.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, they beat most of the teams they should have beat.
Mm-hmm. They also lost to some they shouldn't have.
But
when you look at their schedule, there's not a team where it was like, that's another juggernaut, and they slayed them. They came close a couple times, but it didn't happen.
Beat anybody handily except for the Colts.
But who didn't?
Kansas City. I mean, we could always do that. But, I mean, for Los Angeles, there are there are good things to think about, and there are better days on the horizon. But like you said, and we're going to get into this in another episode, you got to think about, what does this offseason look like for the Chargers? Who do you need? What do you want? And what's this team, going to look like in the future? Because in the offseason here, Ausin Eckler is a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that needs to be figured out.